And we'll open with a word of prayer. Dear God of heaven and earth, we thank you for this day. And we ask that you will bless us as we have gathered in for our midweek study. And we want to especially hold up those that are in ill health, are struggling with anything that is either physical or mental or emotional. We just ask that you will reach down and touch us individually. We know that your spirit dwells in each of us, and we lean on that a lot, dear Lord, and we just ask that you'll press close to us now, be with those that are unable to be here, be with each one, and bless us in the dispensation in which we're in. We know that the Sunday law is approaching and are coming to further understand just all of the different parameters of it. And we want to allow you to do the work in our own individual hearts that's yet needed. So be with us, bless us, in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen. Okay, and we are going to begin with a little bit of review. I went back through some of the earlier messages. Didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of things because it was, in a sense, such late notice, but at the same time, it really is, I just can't help but feel how fortunate we are, how blessed we are to have these messages of the Midnight Cry, and as they've built, and yes, it's a lot, but just phenomenal what we've been learning. And Katja had sort of morphed a couple of the Vespers studies into probably 3 into 2. I'll maybe put it that way. And so I'm not going to review a whole lot by any means, because those are already done by Elder Tess as well as by Katja, but I just want to bring out a couple of things. Elder Tess reviews at the beginning of the Vespers 4 by making mention of the 1888, and she actually asked a very good question. Why did it end up such a mess? And it really was I mean, mess is probably a good way of putting it. But at any rate, as we look at 1888 more as it is experienced by the people who were really alive at that point in time, we end up seeing that there is complexity in the history. And believe me, it really was a complex history in more ways than one. The righteousness by faith battle was in many ways the one that gets highlighted within Adventism, but at the same time there were a lot of other things going on, and that was the springboard for us, just as a movement certainly, but for us in those Vespers studies to be able to see the simple gets extrapolated into complicated mess. You know, the simple being the parable, presentations of prophecy. And it can appear very simple. We think of Daniel and his very brief discussion of what we know now as the Diadochi Wars. And instead, it was actually a lot more complicated. Came down to 4 generals, but at the same time, the extra was noise. And so Daniel cuts to the chase and minimizes the narrative to keep it. And we've got the far more convoluted, complex history. And as time has progressed for us in the movement, things definitely have become far, far more complex. And the study Vespers 4 goes into certainly lends itself to that. And we ended up learning, of course, about, and I'm going to connect them, the lateral reading, going beyond the initial source, but instead going to other sources and doing more detailed research. And with that, we still realized that we had to sift sources. And it's both on the left and on the right. Even the left, we've come to recognize that we have to sift the sources and not just take everything. And in some cases, you know, you might have 20% of an article, you might have 95% of an article, you might have 80% of an article, you might have 5% of an article. So that one gets thrown out. This one maybe gets put into a PDF as valid, it's going to be used, and otherwise we maybe take parts. So we take this and this, but leave everything else. And this, we'd maybe take this and this and just simply not use a portion of it. Elder Tess herself has commented that she has to be very careful, and certainly Elder Perminder, I'm sure, is the same, in terms of sharing things, because so often things get misinterpreted by believers or misconstrued, and they'll any of us sometimes misunderstand and bring more pain to the whole process of sharing sources. So Elder Tess, I know, has commented that she weighs out quite a bit before she's going to even give the name of an article, if it's one that isn't very useful other than possibly for one point, and all the rest is in a sense garbage, you know, or even if there's a few points, but because it might get misunderstood, she'll read out the portions herself, and she won't direct anyone to it. She'll just sift it and share what it is that she wants. And then I'm not going to go into it now tonight at all, but the example of Max Blumenthal and the on the far right, and the Democracy Now! Source, I guess one could call it, that he initiated. And then really where it's gotten to in the series of the Vesper meetings is really going into in far more detail 2018, and the why we moved right to left. And the purpose has always been in reference, the overarching theme has been the Sunday law and what will it look like? How will it manifest? And for us to understand that. And so, that overriding theme of the Sunday law, and in this Vespers, Elder Tess at one point asked, what is it that Adventism fears the most? And one person ended up answering Catholicism. And it basically boiled down to that the Sunday law. From early on, anybody that becomes a Seventh-day Adventist generally, and whether they've been raised as a child even, that there is this built-in knowledge that a Sunday law is coming, and that the enemy is going to be the papacy, and it's going to be the Sunday law will be a Sunday Sabbath issue. Now, there are 4 themes, in a sense, sub-theme themes, maybe I'll call them, that Elder Tess was emphasizing, and we've had them a few times. I know those were on tonight. Have it down cold. So, and I'm going to pick on her order a little bit because simply it was already what we've been looking at just briefly, but the history itself, history internally, as I was mentioning, 1888 onwards in Adventism, but also it took us to the moral majority, the history as basically a religious entity became politicized, became a religious, or a political party. And in essence, it was, which party was it that the moral majority gained influence over? It was the Republican Party. So it was the right. And we've had information on that in the past, so I'm not going to go into it too much right now in detail. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we had the history of Pyrrhus, king of the south, and the Battle of Ipsus in particular. And it had implications, or maybe I should say applications, for the 2016 US election, where Hillary Clinton was represented by Antigonus, Donald Trump was represented by, my mind just went blank. Was it Demetrius? Jonathan, I'll ask you. Was it Demetrius? Isn't that terrible? Amazing how your mind can sometimes just go blank.
There were two stories that it gave us. One was Pyrrhus was Putin, Antigonus was
Yes,
Hillary, was that? Antigonus was Hillary, so Demetrius is
Hillary
probably,
Clinton, yeah.
yeah, I think you're right. I think it was Demetrius.
Well, that's it. I was because I knew Putin was Pyrrhus. And actually, I'll put in Putin as Pyrrhus. King of the South. And obviously, Hillary Clinton was actually could have, should have, would have won the 2016 election, but ended up going to Trump. Okay, and the third one that we have reviewed several times now, the two streams of information. So 1996, when Fox got started up, and it was a formalization, both on the left. Let's see how we do that differently. Formalization. We used the symbols of the names CNN and Fox to symbolize the left and the right. So there was a formalization of each, left and right, as we entered into what became known by our movement as information warfare. And it had a lot of steps that led up to that. And the Sunday Law of 2014 with Cambridge Analytica and all the involvement with Russia in the 2016 election, and a lot of different aspects, lots of information. And the line of the Nephilim being the last one. And basically our reform lines. Being familiar with all all of the reform lines and the fractals. Priests, Levites, and Nethinim, and it was the Nethinim line in particular that, because God has to prepare not only Adventism, He's not only preparing us in the movement, and as we're wanting to ideally reach at least a few, some as Levites from within Adventism, but God is preparing the whole world for the Sunday Law. And so it's an important aspect for us to realize that we are not the ones that are preparing either Levites or Nethinim. The Nethinim are learning much of the same things that we are and becoming prepared for the Sunday law by the external events and the sources that they are reading and coming to the conclusions that we're come to, but without our help. Okay. I wanted to go into some of my notes. So, maybe leave that off. Just want to check my notes because I need a couple of points on a couple of the things just in review, but okay, yeah. Actually, the only further comment that I'll make is that the Nephilim are already making decisions that will affect how they perceive the Sunday law event. So that's pretty. And I'll maybe just read a little part of Elder Tessa's comments on the Nephilim. I've just said, pretty well said that. Okay. And that's where she took us. Understanding the preparation for the Sunday law is all well and good. Understanding that the Nephilim are being early rained, plowed, but early rained, latter rained by other sources than the movement is all well and good, but it brings us then to the point, what's the point? And with the shift, why was it that we ended up shifting in 2018, 2019? For some, it didn't really take hold, but and so why did we shift? It's where it sort of came down to, and it didn't have anything to do with becoming globalists and shifting from capitalism to globalism. It didn't have anything to do with, that wasn't what God was trying to teach us. It didn't have anything really to do with becoming climate change believers instead of being climate change deniers. That wasn't the primary thing that God was wanting to teach us in the movement. But we needed to see the two streams of information helped us to realize that as we look more and more at the right, we saw that it was untenable. It was not able to be supported by those of us in the movement. And So that became one of the biggest drivers for why we ended up shifting left. Had to. And in essence, at that point in time, God was opening up to us that we had been holding on to things that were contrary to their kingdom, to God's kingdom. And as a consequence, we had to unlearn and relearn. And we had to let go of a lot of different cherished things. And one of the principles, there was the structure, the reform lines. So the reform lines themselves provided a structure and a principle that prophecy always, agrees. I was going to say supports for a second, always agrees with prophecy. And what happened was there were many aspects to the messages. We had let me just draw it here. And again, it comes sort of like the spokes of a wheel. But there were different aspects. There was the king of the north, king of the south. There was 1989, 1996, those histories. There were multiple things. I'll just highlight a couple. What we've already alluded to, the 2016 election. The just generally paying attention to current events and understanding what was happening in the world. What was going on in our modern day. And you add to it all of the specific little details all along the way. And we started to realize everything gravitated around one central point, coalesced around one central point. And everything coming from different directions and so on, but it was always indicating that this movement had to use the word shift. It implies a change in position. It implies learning curve. It implies a change in ideology. Annabelle, do you understand what ideology is? You want to, just in your own words, explain what you believe ideology is? That was one of the things that was brought out in one of the by one of the participants
Yeah,
in the Vespers. Go ahead. Yes.
right. The participant was counting, considering ideology to be more on the right wing, and
Right.
Hess had responded by saying ideology is a way of thinking, and it actually can apply to both sides.
Exactly. Because it was Josephine wanting to bring in the right side is ideological, as
Mhm.
opposed to the left side is non-ideological. And yes, Elder Tess wanted to flesh it out a little bit more as to where she was going with that, what she was wanting to bring out. And that's it. You're quite correct. Ideology is, I mean, in religious terms, we would put it in words like a belief system, right?
Yes.
But just in general, an ideology is, and it can be speaking about communism, it can be speaking about socialism, it can be speaking about capitalism, it can be speaking about a lot of different things, but there are certain tenets to it, certain protocols, if I can use that word, it's not quite accurate, but that are adhered to for it to make up a specific ideology. And it often is more tied with a political position. So this movement had to shift in ideology and in our actions to remain a line of success. Which was Christ's line. Whoops. Is the other one that was the line of success. If we didn't shift, and a lot in 2019 with the German meetings that were happening through the course of the summer, a lot of people weren't willing to shift, weren't willing to make that shift. And the messaging had been coming out in 2018, the fall onwards, and there were a lot of people that didn't make the shift. So probably going to erase this. And I want to go into a little bit the ethos of the right and the left.
Debbie, could you take a picture of it first?
I was just thinking, yes, I knew possibly that would ask that. I'll see if I can do it quickly with, oops,
I think Katja would appreciate that too.
wow. Usually I end up on I stand up on a little just a moment, we're not so much gonna use it. Although that isn't true, because I probably will do the list on the whiteboard. Sometimes less light is better. It was kind of cute, Elder Tess in her Vespers. And now I can't honestly remember if it was number 4 or if it was number 5. She had people going on, and while she erased was how she put it. That was kind of cute. And again, she also a couple of different times. I mean, she's got such a cute personality. With Molly adding in 1 or 2 questions and or some very good answers. He always generally gives good answers, but at any rate, she said, well, Molly's speaking, the rest of you can have a moment to be thinking, and then add in. Okay, so we're now going to be going to the ethos a little bit of the right and the left, because where Elder Tess brought us to with why did we shift, we ended up realizing that, it's all well and good to understand the history, to understand some of the things that brought us to a place where yes, we're going to shift, but at the same time, without understanding what the right stands for, and then as a consequence, understanding what the right stands for, what does the left stand for, and are we really in agreement with everything? We have to look at both of those. And in a sense, the ethos, I'll just put it up here. Ethos. I'll just use the word character, because it is the Greek word for character. So the character of something. And I'm going to suggest, as Elder Tess did, that it can be summed up in 1-word answers. And I'm not going to much of the study was fleshing out what everyone felt, the words that they wanted to bring forward as the descriptors for both the left and the right. But at the same time, we are going to go into it. Just looking for my others notes. Wow, there they are. Many surfaces to put things on. So, Jonathan, I know you'll know, so I hope I'm not putting you on the spot at all. What were the 2 1-words in the course of the Vespers that came out? And I might be wrong, but I think it was the initial start of when we narrowed it down to these 2 representative words. Was from these Vesper sessions. But what are the 2 words?
Freedom and equality.
That's right. And which is which? I know you know.
The right wing is freedom and the left wing is equality.
And as I was listening through, actually a couple of the Vespers, and I had heard some of them, not perhaps all of them previously, but you know, it's amazing how your brain sort of starts making things maybe more complicated than what they are, or almost in some ways like your brain starts playing tricks on you. Because some of these things, they are complex to understand. Some of the terms, as Elder Tess brings out, the distinction between freedom and equality can appear to be fairly subtle. But at the same time, when you get into the specifics and actually distill it down to the quintessential, to the essence, to the root, she uses that term, to the center of what it is, you can see that they're different and they are going to support different aspects, and in a sense end up almost as though they're opposites, which in for our purposes in many cases they are. Okay, so I think it was Marie that brought out the word reactionary, and I'm going to put that up because I know I've used that a little bit myself in my own mind at different times. You know, as we've been discussing the left and the right, and I'm going to put as the opposing one for that over on the left side, progressive. And in a sense, the word that often gets used, and it's on Elder Tess's list, brought forward by different people, but is the word, you see what I put opposite it as I was filling mine in. Yeah, no, I didn't put anything, so I'm gonna put in brackets or with a slash, conservatism. Wanting to keep the status quo, wanting to conserve and to well, make things great again, make things the way that we think they should be, that we think they were at some point in time. And reactionary is not quite that. It's reacting against. And we see a lot of that nowadays with the right towards the left. They react to everything. In fact, I think it was Molly, no, pardon me, it was somebody else, but that ended up commenting that one of the words, I think it was great, that brought out, and I'll just use the short version, because Elder Tess had wanted sort of one word, but adverse to change, adverse to progress, adverse to anything they felt threatened by. And on the other hand, on the left, they're willing to change, they're willing to progress, they're willing to be creative, to think outside the box, and so on. And of course, we've got our regular terms. Somebody had brought that out. It's more the political designation than it is the ethos, but put it down. And Elder Tess comments at one point that she doesn't necessarily agree with every word that ended up on their list, but I mean, they were discussing and brainstorming and dialoguing and so on. Socialism was one of the terms that was brought out. And the comment is made, this is more to do with financial systems. Yet, one of the overriding accusations from the right, rather, is that the left are socialists. They have become far left, and they're destroying the United States, destroying democracy. And we had mentioned earlier this evening globalism and nationalism, and community. And it's interesting because, again, I believe it was Josephine that brought up that point, and she used the word self, and Elder Tess wanted to, with Josephine's permission, change it to the word individual. But at the same time, one of the things that I know I personally have thought over the course of time is there does definitely end up being a selfishness to, I'll just say generally, conservative thinking, or we could even add patriarchal thinking, or, you know, whatever it is. And Elder Tess brings out the comment in terms of Adventism and the view of the Sabbath Sunday law that Adventism believes in still, and how there can end up being a selfishness attached to that, the persecution, and we're going to show them kind of thing. It's them versus us, and we're on the winning side because we're keeping Sabbath, and as a consequence, we'll be able to say when Jesus comes and we're into the millennium, I told you so, we were right, we won, kind of thing. And Elder Tess is making the point that that actually has a root in selfishness, and certainly the individual. You know, are we really, with that kind of a mindset, are we really serving God and wanting to serve others? Or is it more about the individual and about self? Anyway, the two terms that we're very familiar with now: feminist and patriarchal. And any ideas, any others that come to your mind, Jonathan, at all? I've left off one biggie as well. And again, I'm going to put up a couple of the other ones just so it goes into the record. But Josephine's non-ideological and ideological but will exit both are ideological. Both adhere strongly. That's why we've got the partisanship that we have evidence far more people are cementing themselves more and more in either on the left or on the right. And that's to do with ideology and culture in many cases. The renewables was brought out, sort of the climate change kind of aspect. And I'll just say renewables, capitalism, it's got to do with economy as well, but renewables and I was thinking more of climate change deniers, but at the same time, what's the word I'm looking for? And I know one of the ones that I had thought of, but again, it's not necessarily so much to do with the ethos, was interventionist and non-interventionist on the right, interventionist on the left, and non-interventionist on the right. Renewables, and I'll say
Would that be accurate, Debbie, do you think? The interventionist and non-interventionist?
I'm glad you spoke up.
Because we saw with the neoconservatives,
The-
they interventionist, and the paleocons were are they
That's
non-interventionist, or were they not? What was the other one? There's another word. Interventionist, isolationist.
isolationist. That's it, Jonathan. Yes. And so, yes, you are right.
Like you could get them both on each side probably, because I think the far left are non-interventionist,
They're non-interventionist. You're right.
whereas the left,
So let's just put that.
yeah.
So non-interventionist on the left, on the far left. Yeah. And a lot of the Republicans as well. I won't say it on the far right. I'll say more in the center. Are, you know, are also interventionist. There are a lot of Republicans that actually want the Ukraine to receive the aid. So each on both sides, interventionist and non-interventionist. What was the big one? Brendan was the one that brought it out. Do you remember what it was? Big government.
Was it big government and small government?
That's right, Annabelle. Yes. And why is it that one can support big government and one can support small government? And the aspect is brought out in terms of okay. So big government is needed. Why? People on the left believe. Why? Well, actually, I'm going to look at the right first. Small government isn't needed. Why?
Freedom.
Because they want, that's right, they want no government interference, intervention, restrictions, limitations. So no government restrictions, limits. No government control. Government doesn't have any access to people's activities. People are going to be free, freedom to, and we didn't look at the definition of freedom, which we probably should. Freedom is what?
And they would probably say limited access versus no access, because there's some things that they believe the government should be there for, but it's not no interference from the government. It's minimizing as much as possible where the government, I think, interferes with a person's individual freedom. But then they would still want the government to be there to arrest criminals or to have a border security or whatever they want the government there for, to take rights
That's
away
right.
from women.
Okay. Okay, so we'll qualify that. Other than what they, those on the right, deem important.
And it becomes hypocritical because an individual's freedom, like a woman's right to healthcare or abortion, they're more than happy to interfere in that aspect of life, even though it goes against, well, I mean, some libertarians are pro-abortion, but there are some that are anti-abortion because their ideology steps in between or their political beliefs, or however you would say it. They would want the government to interfere on that, even though it contradicts their libertarian philosophy.
Well, and Jonathan, you know, you're bringing us to some of the problematic sides of this equality, freedom, well, I'll say discussion. The freedom definition, Elder Tess brought forward, the condition or right of being able or allowed to do, say, think, etc., whatever you want to, without being controlled or restricted. Freedom, without being limited in any way.
Right. So no one is really
And,
for absolute freedom, even though everyone believes in it. But when you get down to it, everyone has some things that they would want people to be limited on in regards
yes.
to.
Oh, that's it. I was, I'm not sure. I don't think we'll get to it this evening, but Masterpiece Bake Shop. And, well, that's it. We'll see. So we started quite a bit later, but we're coming up to the hour now. I just want to bring out the equality definition that Elder Tess used. A situation in which men and women, people of different races, religions, etc., are all treated fairly and have the same opportunities. And that's what gets brought out, of course, is this tension that exists between equality and freedom. And it's not that freedom is bad. Freedom is a good thing in the right context, and in relationship with equality, where there becomes a tension between the two. Freedom has to give. And these I'm going to take us to the 303 Creative LLC case briefly too. These court cases point that out, this tension that exists. And even the Supreme Court at one point said, well, we'll come to that. So what else did I want to bring out? Oh, big government, we didn't finish. So big government is needed. And this, Jonathan, was exactly why. We need to monitor monitor businesses, monitor people, social media platforms, make sure people are hiring people fairly. We can go on. I do have a third one. Correct, fair, equal treatment, no hate speech. To social media platforms. And a point was made in the discussion, protecting people sometimes in spite of themselves. And an example came to my mind, that safety, different rules of safety. We think just operating on highways and byways, signals and all the different signs of the road and so on and so forth. And the regulations in terms of speed and this and that. And I'll use that word, regulate. Monitor, regulate all aspects of society in terms of what's for the common good of all, what gives equal opportunity to all, and obviously it's not that we've arrived there. It's not far from perfect, but government is there. You need big government because you need a lot of different employees to do all of these different jobs and to help society function well. Over on the right, they have a little more borrowed from the libertarian aspect of things, that people will just sort of normally gravitate towards doing the right thing. And therefore you don't need Big Brother looking over and breathing down your neck at all. Instead, you can have small government, and people will monitor themselves, and they've got the freedom to do it. Okay. So 3 examples were brought forward before we get into the court cases, and I think I'll finish with those 3 examples because court cases we'll leave till next week, the part B. But there were 3 illustrations. Space. Do you remember what the first example was? And it does hearken to, because it leads into the Masterpiece Cake Shop situation, but at the same time, it was an anonymous beginning. Elder Tess was sort of just using it as a generic example. And then she gave some of the specifics and brought it to the actual specific court case. Do you remember what it was that was the first illustration? It was about a person having a business.
He just wanted to hire all men.
He was going to be selling construction equipment, and he only wanted to hire men because he was a little bit sexist. And as a result, okay. As a result, the person who's a store owner, in a sense, believes they're on pretty solid ground, no pun intended, because it's their business. They own it. It's their baby. They've maybe created the name, they've developed everything to do with the business regarding it, they do all the inventory, and as a consequence, they're pretty sure they have the freedom. So, owner of a store owns the land. It's his own land, his own business. His own employees that he's going to hire. Okay. And in the situation, they have to know construction. He's selling construction equipment, materials. He wants them to be knowledgeable, and they have to be able to lift heavy materials. I'll just put it as So he's a little bit sexist. And he's going to hire only men. So what happens? Big government comes along. And force gets applied, as in the name of laws, regulations. Certainly if you're in Colorado or so many other places where some of these cases have occurred. Force hiring women. Because the government says, no, it's not fair. It's not equal that you discriminate against women, hiring them as employees. And as a consequence, so these are some of the requirements. This is the situation. He owns his own land. These are some of the requirements in his mind. And this would be his prejudice. He's sexist. May only be a little bit, maybe a lot. And so the question is asked, is it a woman's freedom to be employed in such a construction store? Is it a woman's freedom to work there? Annabelle, what is the answer?
It's, oh dear. Sorry, I touched the wrong button.
There you go.
Oh,
Wait,
it's equality when a woman has the right to be employed. That's considered equality.
and this was a little bit where I realized this subtlety sometimes is, and this is what Elder Tess is wanting us to really nail down and get our heads wrapped around. The government forcing the owner to hire women is not giving the women freedom. If he's forced to hire the women, it's giving women equality. But why? Why is the answer no? It's equality. And the answer in part is, well, I mean, in total, I don't know. No one has the freedom. And in the course of the discussion, some of the things that are brought out, no one has the freedom. And remember that Elder Tess's one study, don't I have the freedom? So no one has the freedom. And 3 different examples were used. Walk on NASA property. I was thinking of here in Canada, it could be CPR property, it could be, whatever it happens to be. No one has the right to be able to suddenly go up and say, I want to be an astronaut, I'm here. No one has the freedom to enter my or your house and eat your food. That most people would agree with. So whose freedom is getting violated? When a woman isn't being hired by a construction store, not even a construction company, but a construction store, whose freedom is getting violated? If the man, the owner, has to hire the woman, his freedom is being violated. Her freedom is not being violated by not being hired, but his freedom is being violated by having to hire a woman. So if someone, yeah. So the owner's freedom gets violated in hiring and having to hire, I should have put, but in hiring a woman, being forced by the government. The woman's freedom doesn't. And the same principle applies, someone entering your house, do they have the freedom to enter your house and just start eating your food? And comments were made in terms of, well, that's stealing, and no, they don't have the freedom, and if it's your things and someone else doesn't have a right to your things, then it doesn't violate their freedom by being kept out of your house, because they have no right to your house, but it does violate your freedom if they enter your house and start eating your food. It's a violation of your rights, your freedom, because you own, I'll say the house, you own the food. So there's a principle. A person's rights stop where another's begin. And we're using the word rights. I mean, that word freedom could plug in there. And so what we're wanting to understand is a violation of a person's rights occurs when another person and I'll just say does or takes, or I mean, there could be other verbs that we'd fit in there. Something they have no right to. Now, there were two other illustrations. Oh, actually, I want to just read this other thing. So when the government forces someone in their own business to do something against what that person believes or agrees with, the owner's freedom is being violated. The other individual, a woman, to be hired, an LGBTQ customer, in the case of a cake shop, whatever it happens to be, is receiving equality, not freedom, if that person, that woman is hired, or if the LGBT person is served. They're being treated fairly, equally. And it's not because they have the right to be there, the freedom to be there, because the owner of the store has the freedom to because they own it, it's their business, they have the freedom to hire who they want, serve who they want, etc. Freedom lies on that side. So if a woman is hired, if an LGBT person is served, it's not because they have the freedom for that. It's that equality is being extended to the woman or to the LGBTQ customer for them to be able to be hired or to be served. So where the disconnect comes is when there's an individual who believes, well, I have the right, it's my business, I pay the taxes for this building, I can hire who I want, I can serve who I want or not serve who I want, and it's my freedom. So a government that operates on the principle of freedom versus a government that operates on the principle of equality are going to look totally different. And court cases are going to portray that. Now, there was another illustration, two other illustrations. I'll just quickly make mention of. Illustration number 2 was about, and Elder Tess used national park. I'm going to just change it to a park, because in Canada, our national parks, of course, you have to have a park pass to be able to access, or else pay a fee. They're still open to the public, but you have to pay to access them. So I'm just going to say a park, public land. That's the point. And of course, the principle is that anybody has access to public land. And everybody equally can access the public land. And it's a matter of equality, equal access. And then another illustration that Elder Tess brought in was in terms of social media platform. And she brings in the point that it's my platform, it's my my page, Facebook or whatever it happens to, Instagram, whatever it happens to be, social media platform. I use it, it's got my name on it. I quote unquote own it. And you have no right. So the freedom side would be saying you have no right. Nobody has a right to tell me what I can say or not say on my platform. So I have the right. To say or do whatever I want. No one else can come over and take over my platform. And any threat to that is violating my freedom. So operating on freedom, if we're operating on freedom, each in their sphere, NASA, CPR, national parks, whatever it happens to be, whatever happens to be the context, each in their sphere has the freedom. So don't need big government. The national park system down in the US is phenomenal. That they set aside the tracts of beautiful land all over. And it was a hard-fought win, in a sense, to do that. And part of the purpose was that it would be available to all, for all subsequent generations. And that kind of equal access and equal thought and so on is something that exists with equality. And it's interesting because Elder Tess made a brief comment. I need to go back and sort of let it gel a little bit more. But Donald Trump being kicked off Twitter by X now, but by Elon Musk at the one point, and then eventually later being invited back. Actually, pardon me, it wasn't Elon Musk. It was before, when it was before he had bought it, I think. Donald Trump getting kicked off. And Elder Tess just made a passing comment in terms of what we think of that. She just sort of alluded to it. She didn't tip her hand as to what it is that she or indicate what it is that she was thinking. But this is it. This is where we come to the problem, and it gets pointed out when freedom I'll say collides with equality. There's tension. And in a sense, one's got to give. It's like some kind of competition. They're in tension. There's a elasticity stretching between the two that's like a tug of war. One is going to win out over the other. And so when freedom collides with equality, it becomes a situation of which is going to be on top. Both freedom and equality are good. Freedom is a good thing. We need freedom. But at the same time, it's when there's a collision between the two. Is it going to end up being freedom over equality or equality over freedom? And we know that it works out that equality has to be supplant freedom if a system is going to be proper, correct, equal, fair, whatever word we want to use to describe it. Well, I was going to get into the two of the court cases, but obviously we're well out of time, so I'm going to leave it there. I want to leave us because we're coming up now to the problem that exists in this tension that is between freedom and equality, because often it comes down to, I'll use the red one. Problem. Whose freedom? So each of these illustrations, whose freedom is being violated? Whose freedom is to be surrendered to allow equality for another? And it's when people fight against surrendering their freedoms, what they perceive as being their rights, their individual rights, to they fight against having to surrender that to provide equal access or fair treatment to somebody else, generally minorities, whether it be women, whether it be LGBTQ plus individuals. And next time we'll go into those two cases. With that problem in mind, well, no, I'll leave it there. So we'll close with prayer, and yes, we'll close with prayer. Dear God of heaven and earth, we thank you that you have been teaching us about equality, and that through your instruction to us, through our leaders, we are able to instruct others, because these are nitty-gritty situations. These happen in the real world and with other people that we know. And for us to have the right understanding for ourselves, but also to have the right understanding so that we can see situations correctly on behalf of others that we know and guide them correctly as well, is very important. And we appreciate you opening these complex issues up to our understanding. And the most important thing is, as we're living the right way, that we will truly come to understand what the Sunday law really is going to be all about. And ourselves be on the right side of these issues. Be with us through this week. I particularly pray for those that are in pain, suffering, in dire straits, facing heavy-duty decisions, ones that are in war-torn areas. We just ask, Lord, that we will play a part in hastening the coming of the Lord by our own cooperation with you in learning all that you would have us learn, and in being able to serve others as you would have us. Thank you for blessing us. In Jesus' name, amen.